Hey everyone, I'm Jay, and in this video, part of my beginner web developer series, I'll be building a page from scratch, just a simple Hello World page using Dreamweaver. We'll be using the CSS Designer, the insert command, and look a little bit at the properties window as well, and the files tab, of course, to create a new file. So let's get started. I have a little bit of a display here. This is pretty much what I'm going to build. I'll probably pick different colors though, but I'm going to build a simple hello world message. Uh, so let's have a look at our files. I have only a previous example and this home page right here in my files, and a couple of ignored files that are not part of this website. They're just part of my GitHub thing. So I'm going to click on my files panel. This is where I like to create new files. You can go to the file menu and click create a file. I prefer to do it this way because then I can see exactly where I'm placing that file, and I can create a directory for it as well, or a folder. So I'm going to right click on, this is my main folder of my website. I'm hosting it in GitHub Pages. And so I've made a directory for it right there that's named after the repository in GitHub. So I'm going to right click there, create a new folder, and call this one module 2. It's the second file that I'm making in this series. And then I'm going to right click here, create a new file called index.html. You probably can't see everything on my screen right now, but I am reading it all to you. So the main directory of my entire website, just called Hello World, I created a new directory called Module 2. Let's see if I can zoom this up. No, I cannot zoom that. That's called Module 2, and then the file that I made in there is called index.html. The way the internet works, the way HTML works is index.html is traditionally the default file. So if you go to a website, if you go to such and such.com slash module 2, you don't have to write that index HTML on the end because the internet will look there first anyway. So if that's the page that you want, you don't have to type it. If you wanted a different page, like let's say I wanted index2.html, you would have to type that. There are a couple other defaults as well, but for today's purposes, we're only concerned with this one. So now that I've created it, I can double click on this and it will open up in Dreamweaver. And I close my files view here. I like to use the split view. So I have the preview on top and the code on the bottom. I'm going to zoom in on the code so that you can read it. I'll just have a quick look at what's in the code. We're not going to type any code in this video. We're going to do it all through the clicking and the dragging and dropping and whatnot. Or really, we're going to do it all through the CSS Designer, almost all of it. But I am going to look at what's provided for us by Dreamweaver. So every new HTML file you make in Dreamweaver, it's going to give you this little template. First, it's going to give you the doc type, which is HTML. This tells your browser before it even reads anything in the file, tells it that it's going to be an HTML file, and it tells it what kind of HTML file. There are many other older doc types that were long and complicated. Starting HTML5, it was simplified, and now it's just called doc type HTML. So then we have our HTML element. It begins here, less than, then HTML, then the name of it, HTML, and then a greater than symbol, and it ends down here. The beginning and the end look almost identical, except the end always has this slash, right? So that's the beginning of the HTML element, which contains everything this HTML page has to offer as far as the browser is concerned. And then there's the end of the HTML element. Right? So the HTML element is going to have two pieces, the head and the body. They each also have a beginning and an end. the head has a couple of things in it. It has this meta value, which is kind of, you can consider it kind of like an attribute. It's a meta setting. The definition of meta is data about data, right? So the meta setting is a setting for the page itself. So it's like a setting of the page, right? So this tells us that our character set is UTF-8, which strictly speaking, you don't have to write this. Your browser would be able to figure it out. But anytime we can help our browsers to run a little bit faster, it's a good idea. Faster websites work a little bit better. Users like them better. They stay on our website more. So we want it to be a little bit faster, snappier, all that good stuff. And it's not that hard. Dreamweaver did it for us. We don't have to do any work. Next setting is the title. It also has a beginning and an end, and it has some content in it. We only just created this file, so they've been so kind as to call it untitled document. And then at the end of our head, they did give us a little space right here, and then there's our body. Again, we've just created this file. There's nothing in the body. The body is actually the part of the HTML element that provides the content to the user. So we've not created anything. There's nothing in there. So let's go ahead and click. I'm going to click in my preview area, and there is a live view and a design view. I'm not worried about that for this video yet. I'm just clicking in the preview area. In fact, Dreamweaver is not even kind of giving me that option at the moment, which is fine because I'm not using that option right now anyway. So I'm just going to click in this preview area, and we talked about the title a little bit. We said what it is. If you click on the page itself in this area and then click on properties, pretty much any element that you click on, when you click on properties, you do get some properties that you can set. You get a different set of properties for different elements. For the page itself, I get to change the document title. So I'm going to call this Hello World. And then you can either hit enter or just click outside of the box here. And I like to click in this little blank area right here so that I didn't trigger anything else. And you'll see it change the code for us. This title, this is going to be, if you're in your browser, this is the part of the page on the tab there. That's that title. And so those are the properties that we're going to set for here. We're clicking here, and we actually have to build some content into our body. And the way we build it is by inserting some content. And we have a lot of things that we can insert. A lot of them are going to be for, almost all of them are going to be for another video. We're going to insert a heading, and the default heading, or the heading that I had previously insert, is the H1. We have 1 through 6. The H1 is the largest of them, and it's going to be the heading that is for the entire page. As you navigate into your page and you have sections inside of sections, that becomes your cue to use the next heading tag if you're putting headings on all of them. You probably should be putting headings on all of them. One, it's good for your readers, and two, search engines look for headings in order to get that juice, that information that the search engines need. So the reason they like it is because it's good for users, right? Their customers are the users. So when you create a new H1 tag in Dreamweaver, it is going to give us some default text in here. It says this is the content for layout H1 tag. That's what provides some generic text. We're not worried about that. I'm just going to highlight that and write hello world. Okay? And then you don't want to hit enter when you're done, because that's going to give you, if you look at our code down here, hitting enter actually gave me a extra paragraph below my H1 tag, and a special character here with a non-breaking space. If I hit backspace, I can't even undo that. What I actually have to do is I use the undo command to undo that. So if you accidentally hit enter, you're going to want to hit undo, or you can come down into the code and delete it. Okay? If you're comfortable editing code and you don't always want to click in the Dreamweaver editing window here, go ahead and edit the code. That's totally fine. This video, I'm going to do everything on the top half of my split view. So now I have hello world. What I want to do is style this a little bit. We just don't want black text on a white background all the time. That's not a very exciting web page, not a very interesting web page. So I'm going to click on my H1 right here, and we're going to go into our CSS Designer. Remember, when you click your element, have a look all the way down at the bottom, and you can see these little flag looking things where Dreamweaver will show you which element you actually have selected on the page. So if I had a lot of elements and I wasn't positive that I clicked on the right one, I could look down here and it will tell me, hey, you clicked on the H1 tag that is within the body element. Well, of course I did. This is the only element that I have right now, but if I had a lot of elements, this would be helpful. Right, so I clicked on this H1. I'm going to go into the CSS Designer. I want to make some styles to colorize and to change some of the elements of this H1 element that I made. Change some of its attributes, some of the styles. Before I can give it some style, I do have to add a source, add a place to save that style. And so I could click right here in this button they provided me, or I could click this plus, and then I could choose, I could create a new file, attach a file that already exists, or define in page. I'm going to define in page. It's the easiest option for now. So when I do that, you'll see that in the head of our code, it added this little style area. And so now any styles that we make are going to exist there. What it also did is it moved my cursor. So I'm going to reselect my hello world, my H1 here, come back into my CSS Designer. I'm not worried about these app media. That's for a much later video. I'm looking at selectors. I want to make a CSS selector, and what that is, it's named for what it does. It allows you to select some element on the page and then style it however it is that you're going to style it. So I'm going to hit the plus to make a new one, and you'll see that it chooses the H1 tag for me, and that's because that's what I had selected. So Dreamweaver is pretty kind to us. Whatever element you have selected, it will choose for you. And not only did it choose the H1 as a selector, but it actually added some specificity for me, being a little bit more specific. It said, hey, not just all H1 tags, but all H1 tags which are within the body tag. For our purposes, that's actually a rather useless amount of specificity because we're only going to have the one H1 tag anyway. So I'm going to get rid of that body in the selector and just put some style for all the H1 tags on the page, all of them. There's only one, but if I had a lot of them, they would all get the same style. So when you create that, I have a style. We look at our code. I have an H1 selector down here. The syntax for these, which we don't have to worry about too much if we're building with Dreamweaver, but the syntax is on the first part, you write your selector, and they can get much, much longer and somewhat complex. We're doing a simple H1 tag. You have your selector right here, and then you have an open and a closed curly brace. And then within those curly braces, that's where we write all of our styles. We're not going to write it today. Dreamweaver is going to do it for us. And we're going to choose from all these options here in the property section of our CSS Designer panel. Well, I don't see any, and the reason is, you might have the same issue on your screen, is I have this show set selected, and while it's selected, it's only going to show me the properties that I have already set, which if I had a lot of things set already, that would be useful, but I have nothing set already, so it's going to show me nothing. I want to uncheck that. And then I can see all the available options for me to set through CSS Designer. There are a lot more CSS, well, there are some CSS options that are not included here. And for all of those, you can come down to the more, and there's a blank field right here, and you can manually type those in. So you can, through here, you can type in any CSS you want, even if it's not provided, you can manually type it in. Instead of scrolling through all these, if you want to jump around, you can click the layout button, the text button, the order button, the background button, or go down to the more area by clicking the more button. And all that does is just jump through this scroller. All here, if you vertically scroll through all of them, they're all there. Clicking the button just lets you jump to that section. So I jump to the text section, and that's because I'm going to change the color of my text. I'm going to make it some sort of yellowish color. And then I just like to click outside of that instead of hitting enter or anything like that. You can do whatever you're comfortable with. So now I have this somewhat ugly yellow color for my hello world text. Totally fine. I'll go back into my designer. I want to give it a background color. My background color, I'm going to make, let's make, I did green earlier. I'll do green again. All right, so I'll make a dark green with a weird yellow. All right, it's not actually the kind of background color I want to do, because this just gives me a thin stripe of background color on my H1 element. It is useful if you're troubleshooting and you want to see exactly where your H1 element is and the entire width and height of it. But it's not helpful for me because I actually want to set the background color of the entire page, not just that. So I can come back in here, go back in my CSS Designer, find the background color, hit the little trash can, and get rid of that, unset that. So the way I'm going to set the background color for the whole page is make a new selector, hit that plus button, and I didn't have the body selected, but I know that where I want to set is for the body. The body is the entire visible page, so I want to set the body element. I can just type that in, hit enter. Actually, I have to hit enter 2 times. That's just the way Dreamweaver is behaving for me, right? So I can click on body, go to background color, and I'll select a dark green color again. And then I just hit outside of this box, and it will make the entire page this dark green color, which is nice. Whole page. Right? So now I have some ugly yellow text with some kind of dark green background. And I want to kind of emulate that first page that we saw at the beginning of the video. So I'm going to make my text larger. Remember to click on the correct selector. I don't want to leave my choice as the body. I don't want to change the text size of the full page. I only want to change the text size of my H1 element. So click over to text, choose font size. Now you'll notice when I click on text, some of these things say things like font family, font style, font variant, and then a couple of them actually are text align, text decoration, text indent, text transform. So some things start with font, some things start with text. It's not going to change anytime soon. It's been like that for over 20 years. You just have to get used to it. Font size, that's what I want to select. All right, the default is this medium option. I never use these small, medium, large type options down here. I don't use them. I'm going to almost exclusively use for text. I almost exclusively use either EM or REM, but I am going to tell you what many of these are. So PX, that's pixels. How many pixels do you want your font size? And this is vertically speaking. Uh, Generally speaking, the default font size is going to be 16 pixels. PT or points, that calls back to like Microsoft Word documents. They would be like a 12-point font, right? PC or Pica, this is not commonly used. I never use it. Percentage is very common for layout elements, not very common for fonts. Right? This is going to be a percentage of the parent element or the available space for this element, which is the same thing, right? The available space inside the parent element. So percentage and px, pixels, very, very common for layout element, for boxes, right? For containers, that kind of thing. Not so common for fonts. For fonts, I prefer EM and REM. They are very similar. They're almost the same. EM is the width of a capital letter M in your chosen font, I think. If you choose a different font, the width of the capital letter M is a little bit different. So that's what an EM is. And the REM is exactly the same thing. It's the width of the letter M. The difference between EM and REM is the REM is going to be that width of the capital letter M at the top level parent element of the page. So actually the HTML parent element, whatever that width is, whatever that font size is, that's what the REM is. And the EM is actually going to be the same thing, only relative to whatever the current element inside your page is. So in my example, I'm doing H1 tag, which is within the body, which is within the HTML. So there's a parent-child relationship, and they can inherit some of these settings all the way down. And since I've not changed any of them, that inherited value is actually the same. But if I had a very large page with some font size changing, you might not know what that font size is when you finally get down to the bottom. So sometimes if we know what size we are at when we get down to that internal location on a very complex page, if we know what that size is, we're comfortable with it, we can use EMs very comfortably, not a problem. Other times, if we're unsure and we want to be a little bit more precise, we can use that REM, and we can set that EM relative to the parent page. I'm going to use REM. So the default is 0 REM, and when you put the font size of 0 REM to font size of 0, it disappears. So I'll come back in here, and if I was to say 1 REM, and then have a look at it, 1 REM is exactly 1 times that REM. So it's going to be the default text size, really. So I'm going to make this really large and make this 8 REM, a big hello world, 8 REMs high. Okay, and I'm going to center that text. So if I come down here, we may have seen text align, and I'm going to click center. You can choose left, right, justify, or center. I'm going to center it. Have a quick look. Hello world is centered. And then if you remember my example from earlier, when I first turned it on and I said hello world, the hello world was actually centered both horizontally and vertically. And so we're going to do some layout options for that. and come down to the position in order to get that vertically positioned. The default position for every element in HTML here is going to be static. And HTML is an interpreted language. So as your browser is reading the code from top to bottom, it's going to interpret it and display whatever it sees. So once it reads down far enough to read my H1 element, it'll display that wherever it happens to be. So that's static positioning. There's no changes, static. I'm going to change that for this element to absolute positioning. And what that means is it's going to position it absolutely. It's going to take it out of flow of everything else. It no longer has a width of and a height. That width and height no longer get calculated into the page view, right? So you can actually put things on top of each other with this. And it puts it in the top left corner of the available space according to its parent. And actually, if you have many, many absolute positioned elements on top of each other or otherwise positioned elements, sometimes that does get very convoluted. But that's all right. We don't have that right now. So I'm going to absolute position this. And you can choose, generally when we do an absolute position, we choose the top left corner to position it from, and we give it a value from the top, down from the top, and a value over from the left. You'll notice that as soon as I absolute position this, or set that position to absolute, my hello world changed its width. It used to be the whole width here, and it used to actually be centered. Now it's only the width that it actually needed to be in order to fit that text. It's also only that same height that it needed to be as well. So I don't need to change its height, but I do want to give it back its width. So I can choose a percentage width and call it 100% wide. And now we see that it is indeed 100% wide. You'll get some of these I am getting these scroll bars, and that's probably just because my screen is zoomed a little bit and it's not fitting. So don't pay attention to that. We'll have a look at it in the browser in a minute here once we finish setting our position. So I want to position it from the top 50% down from the page. That sounds pretty good, right? If I bring it down halfway down the page, it'll be centered. And on the left side, I don't have to set a value. I'm going to leave it at 0 pixels from the left because it is 100% wide. So that should be fine there. I don't need to set the right and the bottom because I have a top left corner and I have a width and I actually have a height. I didn't set the height, but remember we have a font size of 8 rem, and that allows us to kind of back into the height of the element because we have text and we've given the text a font size, so that does give us a height. Gives us a height to work with. So we have this set. Let's come into our page and save and refresh my screen. There we go. And you'll see that it is actually too far down, right? So this is the hello world that we made. It's 50% from the top and it's centered. But remember, it's 8 rems high, and then it's 50% from the top, and that's actually at the top of the text. So the top of the text, which is right about here, that is the middle of the page. So let's go back in, and one of the ways that we can fix that is we have margin available, and margin in CSS does actually allow us to set a negative margin. So on my top side, I'm going to set a negative for rem, get rid of that pixel setting, right? And remember, our font size was 8 rem, so half of that would be -4 rem, and that allows me to get the center of the text, hopefully should be in the center of my page. So I'll save that, refresh my page, and that looks pretty centered. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. So I have a big hello world centered in my page with yellow and green colors for no reason. It's just how I feel like today. My previous one was green and blue. This one is yellow and green. All right, let's have a quick look at our code. We didn't actually type anything in the code view. We used the CSS Designer, the insert, the properties panel, and the files panel. We didn't type down here in the code view at all. But here is our Dreamweaver created the style for us. H1, Dreamweaver made all the text for us. We gave it the settings. This is the color, that yellow color in hexadecimal. First two characters are the red value. Second two characters are the green value. And the third two characters are the blue value. Put them together and your monitor knows how to make that color. We have our font size, text align. If you are typing this by hand, I do recommend you organize this in some fashion that you and anyone else that you're working with can read it better. Some development places choose to do it in alphabetical order. Personally, I do it in a particular layout where I have all the layout settings at the top. Those would be in alphabetical order, and then I actually leave a blank space. Then I do all the font related settings. Those would be in alphabetical order. Then I have a space. Then I do all the border and background colors together. And then I leave another space. And if I have any settings that don't quite fit any of those categories, then I put those in there. And that actually coincidentally does fit with the CSS Designer right here, but I combine the border and the background settings in my section just because they're kind of similar to me. That's how I lay them out. You can lay them out however you like, or just leave them the way CSS Designer builds them. The way the CSS Designer builds them is in whatever order you set them, that's the way that it types them. It's not going to change anything. And it actually doesn't matter what order they're in, because none of these are going to override themselves. If you had things that overrode something else, then the order does matter. But if you did that, that would mean that you were writing the same thing twice, which we may do on more complicated pages, but we are not doing today. So that's going to do it for this example. Right? We have a large yellow hello world on a green background. CSS Designer. Thanks for watching.